Hello and welcome to today's Jaggers video. Today we're going to ask ourselves why he lives in Gerrard Street in Soho rather than closer to work. Here on Google Maps you can see the camera pan from where he works at the top of the screen to where he lives at the bottom. Next to it you can see the Thames. You get a rough idea of the huge distance he's got to travel, much further than Pip. So why does he choose here?
Okay, here we are in the tourist area of London. Can you guess where I am? Yep, you can tell from that behind me that it's Chinatown. Let me just give you the other view. Very recognisable to any of you who are lucky enough to travel abroad. We're in Chinatown, but that's not why we're here. We're here because this is where Jaggers lived. And so behind me are the kinds of properties that he would have lived in. There you go. We're going to have a look at some of these, but ask yourself this: why does an area become an immigrant area? Well, obviously it's because it's crowded, it's because there are jobs, and it's because it's an area socially on the way down. So once a proud social area full of rich people and the well-to-do, and then suddenly it falls from favour. And Leicester Square, which we'll go to in a minute, was considered in the late 1800s one of London's least reputable squares. Jaggers is living there earlier, in the early 1800s, although I will sneak around a minute and make a video for my Jekyll and Hyde readers, because hey, you might as well get two bangs for your buck. Anyway, see you soon. So this is the kind of large house that Jaggers would have lived in. This is lived in by the poet John Dryden, born 1631 and died 1700. So 100 years before Jaggers, and you can get a sense of how the place was declining by Dickens' time. Although remember, he's setting it much earlier than his own lifetime. He's setting it about 40 years before. Okay, now a similar house almost next door, and this one belonged to Paul de la Lemerie, and he was the King's silversmith here till 1751. So as we move west along this Gerrard Street, you can see the decline in fortunes of the road. Next door again, the house of Edmund Burke, author and statesman, died 1797, and that's around the time that Pip is 7 years old, at the beginning of the novel. Okay, so this is Gerrard Street, and we can see what Dickens is doing here. He's signposting that Jaggers lives at the heart of what represents Britain, and so he doesn't just represent the law, he doesn't just represent his own corruption, he represents the corruption of his own society, which goes right to the top.
So this is 1750 Leicester Square. This is the street directly behind Gerrard Street. Okay, so 50 years before Jaggers buys his house, presumably, or 40 years before he buys it, this is the respectability and wealth that Leicester Square offered right next door to Gerrard Street. But now, 50 odd years later and 60 years later, when Jaggers has moved in, it's now in decline. And we can see what Dickens would expect Londoners to know. Jaggers lives in a part of the city that was once known for its greatness and has now become rather louche, a little bit backward. It's not an area on the up, it's in the decline, just like Britain. And this is why Pip longs to escape and ends up going to Cairo. It's the symbol of how Britain is no longer a country in which individuals can flourish on their own merit. And why? It's because it's not a society which is now morally just. Instead, it's controlled by people like Jaggers, who are corrupt and use the power of the law to keep that corruption away from punishment. Hope you've enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe.